Have you ever sat in your living room with the TV humming in the background and felt like the world had just moved on without you? Maybe the house is quieter than it used to be, fewer phone calls, fewer reasons to rush out the door, and somewhere in that stillness, you catch yourself wondering, is this it? Is this what alone looks like now? If you've felt that way, even for a second, please know this. You are not alone in feeling alone. And more importantly, being alone doesn't have to mean being unhappy. Today, we're going to have a heart-to-heart about something so many of us experience, but don't always talk about: how to be truly happy in your own company, especially after 60. Not in a forced, fake-it-till-you-make-it kind of way, but in a real, soul-deep, content kind of way. Because here's the truth most people miss. Being alone isn't a punishment. It's a doorway, a chance to rediscover yourself, not as a parent, not as a partner, not as a caregiver, but as you. So let's talk about what that looks like. What does it actually mean to be happy alone? And how do you start finding joy again? Not in the noise, but in the quiet. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat with yourself, not just physically alone, but really with yourself, and felt good about it? Not distracted, not busying your hands or watching a screen. Just you, your thoughts, your breath, your space. If it's been a while, you're not alone. We've spent so much of our lives giving to spouses, to children, to jobs, to friends, that when the giving slows down, we don't always know what to do with what's left. But that emptiness you feel, that quiet, that's not a void. That's space. Space for you to finally ask, what do I want now? What makes me feel alive? Just me, without anyone else to please or impress. The first step in learning to be happy alone is making peace with the silence. That might sound a little strange, but think about it. Most of us have been surrounded by noise for decades. Conversations, responsibilities, little fires to put out every day. And when that fades, silence can feel almost threatening. But here's a different way to look at it. Silence is a gift. It's where you finally get to hear your own voice again. Not the voice that's been drowned out by demands and expectations. Your true voice, the one that whispers your dreams, your curiosity, your desires. Take Susan, a woman I met a while back. At 72, she had just lost her best friend of over 40 years. The silence in her home was loud, deafening even. But instead of running from it, she started walking. Every morning, rain or shine, Susan put on her sneakers and walked her neighborhood. At first, it was just to move her body. But slowly, those walks became something more. A form of meditation, reflection, healing. She told me one day, I realized I'd never really heard my own thoughts before. Not fully. And when I did, I found they were gentler, wiser, and kinder than I expected. That's what happens when you stop fearing solitude and start listening to it. Now, once you've made a little peace with the quiet, the next part is getting curious. Ask yourself, what did I love doing before life got so loud? Maybe you used to paint, or dance, or bake just for the fun of it. Maybe you always wanted to learn photography, or plant a garden, or write stories. You don't need a plan. You just need a spark. Frank, a retired teacher in his late 60s, once told me he felt like an extra in his own life. After his wife passed and his children got busy with their own lives, his days started blending together, just hours filled with background noise and a lot of waiting. But then, during a counseling session at his local senior center, someone asked him, "What did you used to do for fun?" Without even thinking, he said, "I used to write." So he started again. 10 minutes a day. Just him, a notebook and a pen. He wrote memories, made up stories, small moments from his walks. And you know what? That 10 minutes a day became his lifeline. A reason to get up. A reminder that even in silence, his voice mattered. That's the thing about being alone. It gives you a chance to create something for yourself. Not for approval, not for praise, just because it brings you peace. And don't worry if you try something and it doesn't stick. The point isn't to become an expert. The point is to start honoring your interests again. That quiet curiosity inside you, it's still there. It never left. It just needs a little room to breathe. There's another beautiful thing that happens when you begin living for yourself. You stop waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring. Waiting for someone to invite you out. Waiting for the world to notice you. Instead, you start noticing yourself. You become your own company, and you realize you're actually pretty wonderful to be around. Being happy alone isn't about pushing people away. It's not about saying you don't need love or friendship. It's about discovering that your happiness doesn't have to depend on someone else walking into the room, that you can create joy right where you are. And let me tell you something you might need to hear. Your joy is not behind you. It's not lost in your 20s or 30s. It's not gone because someone left or something ended. Your joy is still here, and it's waiting for you in the smallest of places. In your morning tea, in a walk through the park, in a book you can't put down, in a moment of laughter with yourself that no one else even sees. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not done growing. You are not too late. You're right on time to begin living for you. And if that feels unfamiliar, that's okay. Growth always does at first. So today, I want you to take one small moment for yourself. Maybe it's sitting outside and feeling the breeze on your skin. Maybe it's turning off the TV and listening to your favorite song. Maybe it's writing down a memory that makes you smile. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be yours. And when you start stringing together enough of those small moments, something starts to shift. The loneliness, it softens. The sadness, it fades. And what's left is something stronger than you ever imagined. Contentment, confidence, a quiet, steady kind of joy that comes from within and that no one can take away. So now that you've begun to find those small sparks of joy again, the quiet moments, the simple pleasures, it's natural to start asking yourself, what do I do with all this space now? The house feels a little emptier, the calendar a little less full. And for some women, that wide open space can feel intimidating at first, like standing in the middle of a blank page. But here's the beautiful part. That blank page, it's yours. You get to decide what comes next. You've spent so many years filling your days with responsibilities, meeting the needs of everyone around you. And now, maybe for the first time in decades, you have room to write your own story again. It starts with reflection. And no, I don't mean overthinking or dwelling on regrets. I mean gently, honestly looking at your life, where you've been, what you've carried, and how it's shaped the woman you are now. Because reflection isn't about the past. It's about understanding. It's about learning how to move forward with clarity instead of confusion. There's something incredibly powerful about sitting with your own thoughts and saying, I see you. I hear you. And you still matter. You might start remembering things that surprise you, a hobby you let go of, a dream you never got around to, or even patterns in your relationships that you're just now starting to understand. And yes, some of those memories may be hard, but they're not there to hurt you. They're there to teach you. Linda, a widow from Michigan, told me about a moment just like that. After her husband passed away, she spent almost 2 years in quiet grief. She went through the motions, stayed busy, but never really felt present. Then one day, she found an old box of watercolor supplies in her attic. She hadn't painted in over 30 years. But something about that moment, finding that forgotten piece of herself, lit a little fire inside. She sat down that afternoon and painted something, just for her. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was hers. One painting turned into 2, then into a weekly routine. Eventually, her daughter convinced her to display a few at the local library. Today, She teaches a free class for other seniors every Friday afternoon. She told me, "It's not just the painting. It's that it reminds me I'm still here. I'm still creating. I'm still me." And that's the magic of reflection. It helps you reconnect with who you are underneath all the roles you've played. It doesn't erase the loneliness, but it gives it purpose. It helps you see the quiet not as a burden, but as a mirror. Now, as you begin this process of rediscovery, you may also start noticing something else. The way you think about your relationships starts to change. You may realize that some friendships faded not because of anything you did wrong, but simply because people grow in different directions. Or maybe you see now that you gave more than you received for far too long. That's not failure. That's wisdom. When you reflect on your past with compassion, not criticism, you open the door to a more peaceful present. You stop carrying the weight of every unanswered text or unreturned call. You stop questioning your worth based on who shows up for you. And instead, you begin to show up for yourself. Bill, a retired mechanic in his early 70s, shared a story that still sticks with me. After retiring and losing his wife, he said he felt completely invisible, like the world had simply forgotten him. He stopped reaching out to people because, honestly, he was tired of pretending everything was fine. But one day, while walking past a community garden, he decided to volunteer. He didn't go to meet people. He went to feel useful again. At first, he kept to himself, just pulling weeds and fixing tools. But over time, others started noticing. A younger woman asked him for advice about her father. A teenager wanted to learn how to sharpen garden shears. Slowly, without trying to be anything more than himself, Bill became a steady presence, a mentor, a quiet source of strength. He didn't chase connection. He simply lived with intention, and the right people found him. That's what happens when you live from your center. You stop seeking validation. You stop trying to prove your worth through busy schedules or crowded social calendars. Instead, you find peace in your own presence, and from that place, you attract relationships that reflect who you are now, not who you were decades ago. Being happy alone doesn't mean closing your heart. It means opening it with wisdom. It means choosing connection that uplifts, not depletes. Saying yes to conversations that matter and no to obligations that no longer serve you. And when you do that, when you create a life that reflects your truth, you stop waiting for the world to give you permission to be happy. You give it to yourself. Now maybe you're thinking, that all sounds nice, but what do I actually do with my time? And that's a fair question. Because once the reflecting and rediscovering begins, the natural next step is movement. Not rushing or keeping busy for the sake of it, but taking small, meaningful actions that bring you joy. Maybe you start writing again like Frank did. Maybe you dig up those old dance shoes or that dusty guitar. Maybe you learn how to bake sourdough bread just because you've always been curious. Or maybe it's as simple as starting each morning with a question, what would feel good today? Because that question, asked consistently, becomes a compass. It helps guide you toward a life that's full, not because it's noisy or busy, but because it's yours. You don't need a 5-year plan or a bucket list. You just need today, this moment, and the courage to make it yours. There's something powerful that happens when you start asking yourself each day, what would feel good today? Maybe it's a walk in the park. Maybe it's calling that cousin you haven't spoken to in years. Or maybe it's simply sitting in your favorite chair, sipping coffee with the window open, letting yourself just be. Not productive, not distracted, just present. Because once you begin honoring your own presence like that, something deep within you starts to shift. You stop needing your days to be filled with noise. You stop measuring your value by what you accomplish or who reaches out. And you begin to feel something even more lasting than happiness, peace. And that peace? It's where the real joy lives. It doesn't mean life stops being hard. Grief still comes. Some days will still feel quiet and long, but the difference is you're no longer fighting the silence. You're living in it, gently, on your terms. You begin to create a rhythm that works for you, not for the people you used to revolve around. That's exactly what Joyce discovered. After decades of caring for her family, her husband passed and her children moved away. Her days became slow and still. At first, she filled them with errands and TV, just trying to pass the time. But she realized something important. She wasn't really living. She was just staying busy. So she stopped. She started asking herself each morning, what would feel good? Some days that meant walking in nature. Other days, baking cookies just for the smell of them. Sometimes it meant writing down a thought or a memory that made her smile. Little by little, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, herself. And it showed. One afternoon, her son visited and said, "Mom, you seem lighter." And she was. Not because anything outside had changed, but because she had changed the way she met her own life. That's the difference between chasing happiness and creating it. When you chase it, it always feels one step out of reach. But when you create it, moment by moment, breath by breath, it becomes a part of who you are. You don't need a huge life overhaul. You don't need to find some grand purpose. What you need is the courage to make tiny, honest choices that honor what brings you peace. And here's a truth I hope you hold close. You are still allowed to dream. You are still allowed to want things, to try something new, to change your mind, to start over. You don't age out of possibility. You grow into it. Just because the world gets quieter doesn't mean your story is finished. In fact, some of the most beautiful chapters are written when no one else is watching. And as you start creating those quiet, joyful moments for yourself, you'll notice something else begin to happen. Your relationships shift too, not because you chased people down, but because you stopped chasing. You stopped bending and shrinking yourself just to stay in someone's orbit. You started standing in your own light. And from that light, the right people find their way to you. Not everyone, of course. Some friendships may fade. That's natural. And it's okay. Because you're not building your life on who stays or who leaves. You're building it on who you are. And when you show up for yourself in that way, the people who do come into your life, whether they're old friends, new neighbors, or even your own family, will see you clearly. They'll see your strength, your peace, your depth, and they'll be drawn to it. Not because you're loud, not because you're always on, but because you are real. You start to connect with others not from a place of loneliness, but from a place of wholeness. And those are the relationships that nourish you. They don't drain you. They don't require performance or pretending. They are rooted in mutual respect, presence, and truth. And isn't that the kind of connection we all want? You begin to say yes to invitations that truly excite you, and no to the ones that don't. You learn to protect your peace, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. Because after everything you've lived through, you've earned the right to be selective. You've earned the right to live gently, deeply, and fully. And in that space, something beautiful unfolds. The loneliness that once felt heavy becomes light. It becomes solitude, your own sacred space. A place not of absence, but of presence. A place where you can hear your thoughts, feel your emotions, move at your own pace. That's not isolation. That's freedom. And this freedom, it's not loud or flashy. It's quiet, steady, like a soft breeze on a sunny afternoon, like the comfort of your favorite book, like the peace of knowing that, even if no one else is around, you are enough. You are whole. You are worthy of joy. You are not too late. You are right on time. And if there's one thing I hope you take with you today, it's this. You do not need to wait for someone else to bring happiness to your door. You have the power to create it right where you are, in the life you already have, with the heart you've spent a lifetime shaping. So give yourself permission to rest, to explore, to laugh out loud at a silly show, to cry when you need to get up in the morning and stretch and say, "This is my day, and I choose to enjoy it." You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to show up and love yourself enough to keep growing. When you begin to live your days with this kind of softness, this kind of self-respect, something shifts deep inside. You stop needing life to be loud to feel meaningful. You stop needing every moment to be exciting to feel alive. Instead, you begin to see that the most beautiful kind of happiness isn't found in big events. It's found in the quiet rituals of a life lived with intention. It's in that cup of tea you make just the way you like it. It's in the light that filters through your curtains in the morning. It's in the walk where you notice the birds singing or the scent of flowers blooming. It's in journaling a memory you don't want to forget, or dancing by yourself in the kitchen just because it feels good. This isn't about perfection. It's about truth. Your truth. It's about creating a life where peace becomes your daily companion, not your occasional visitor. Where you don't chase after joy, you nurture it, quietly, gently, like a flame you've learned to protect from the wind. And yes, some days will still be hard. Some days you'll miss people. Some days you'll wish things had turned out differently. That's okay. Happiness doesn't mean pretending you don't feel those things. It means you've made room for both, the grief and the joy, the past and the present, the longing and the contentment. Think about that. Think about how much you've lived through, the people you've loved, the things you've overcome, the ways you've grown without even noticing. You've already done so much of the hard work. Now, you get to let that wisdom carry you forward. You get to decide that your worth doesn't come from what you do for others. It doesn't come from how full your calendar is or how many people call you back. It comes from how deeply you honor who you are today. And the truth is, you're still becoming. You're still unfolding. You are not finished. You are not forgotten. You are still here, and there is still so much beauty left in this world for you to touch, taste, see, and feel. Take a moment to breathe that in. Really feel it. You don't need to be surrounded by people to feel loved. You don't need to constantly be useful to be valuable. You don't need to be busy to feel worthy. What you do need is to remember that happiness isn't something you find outside. It's something you build inside. One breath, one moment, one gentle choice at a time. Start with small rituals. Maybe a morning stretch, a handwritten note to yourself, lighting a candle while you read, making a meal that feels nourishing just for you. These are not small things. These are declarations. They say, I matter. My joy matters. My peace matters. And if one of those rituals is watching a video like this, if it makes you feel even a little more seen, a little more understood, then keep coming back. Let this be a space where you feel connected, even when you're physically alone. Because you're not alone in spirit. Not ever. There's a whole world of women out there, strong, beautiful, wise women, who are also walking this path, who are also learning to let go of old roles and embrace this new chapter. And you? You're one of them. You belong here. If today you made your bed with love, or smiled at your own reflection, or simply took a deep breath and said, I'm doing okay, then that's a victory. That's happiness, and you deserve to celebrate it. So, my dear friend, if this message spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment down below. Share one small joy you chose today, even if it felt tiny. Sometimes, those are the most powerful ones. And if you know someone else who might need this message, someone who's sitting in their own quiet house wondering if they matter, send it to them. Remind them that they do. And if you'd like to keep having these conversations, to keep building a life that feels meaningful and full of grace, I invite you to subscribe. There's more where this came from, and you are always welcome here. Here's to the life you're creating. One gentle step, one honest moment at a time. A life that's not about being busy or perfect, but about being true. A life where your joy isn't loud, but it's real. And that's more than enough. You are more than enough. And the best part? You've only just begun. Here's to living your best life, alone, but never lonely. You've got this.